business leaders face uncertainty and volatility. Non-humans are entering the workplace, memes control the stock market, and geopolitics is a business concern. Disruption isn't a future concept, it's here. I am Justin Brady, and using 7,000 predictions and 12 major workplace trends from SHRM, you and I will sit down with psychologists, CEOs, scientists, entrepreneurs, and analysts to make sense of it all. This show isn't about the future, it's about actions to take tomorrow. This is Tomorrowist. I'm Justin Brady, and as an executive, one of the things maybe you're worried about is, are those technocrats taking over? Are they going to control everything? Do they already have too much control? That's what we're talking about today. And to do that, Dr. Susie Alegre joins us, international lawyer specializing in tech policy, human rights, and ethics, and senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation. Thank you so much for joining us on Tomorrowist, Susie.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Should also say, you're the author of a few books, just a few to call out here, Freedom to Think, and the new one, Human Rights, Robot Wrongs. Should technocratic control be a concern for executives, and why? And obviously we'll unpack that quite a bit, but should this be a concern for executives?
It absolutely should be a concern for executives, and there are many reasons, which I'm sure we're going to cover. I mean, one of those is a huge power imbalance. That if you are relying on technology to do your daily work, then you A, have to count on that technology working, and you B, have to count on the fact that you're going to be able to afford to use the technology going forward. So control over your ability to do business is something that you really need to be concerned about. And then one of the areas of focus in the book as well is really looking at things like your environmental, social, and governance concerns. So looking at what it means for you and the ethics of your company if you're working using these kind of tools. And one of the things that we'll see as well is how tech monopolies and tech control can pass liability onto you for the problems that you may encounter as a result of using those products.
Now, I mean, ever since I have been a kid, and most of human history, we have relied, at least to some degree, on technocrats and people in authority, people building the railroads, organizations like that. So is it different now?
I think it's different because it's not just about doing business. It's also going into every single aspect of our lives. So, whether you as an individual or as a business want to do banking, whether you want to see your doctor, whether you want to meet new friends, find a partner, all of these kind of things are now being mediated through technology in ways that we often don't really understand. We talk about algorithms. Well, what is the algorithm actually based on? How is it working? How is it affecting our lives and our businesses? And so it's not just about, you talk about the railways. It's not just about getting from A to B. It's about how we think, how we behave, and how we operate. So I think that is one of the really big differences. It's just the extent of our reliance. And we saw it, earlier this year, writ large with the CrowdStrike outage that just kind of started with a glitch and an update somewhere in Australia and then spread across time zones across the world, grounding flights. Certainly here in the UK, a lot of general practitioner doctors' surgeries were affected that suddenly can't access patients' notes. You're having to resort to a pencil and paper to try and make do. And so we've seen how embroiled all aspects of our lives are with technology. And I think that's something that we need to reflect on really carefully as we start thinking about incorporating new elements of technology, and particularly AI, into our lives and into our work.
Yeah, I mean, I should say back when the railroads were being built, we were very much reliant on them. We didn't have other means of transportation. I mean, we had, some. So there is kind of an element to us being reliant on current technology being used to build civilization. And so I imagine this conversation is more about balance and not just straight up AI's bad, because history has plenty of examples of influential people fighting back against technology. Like human flight was considered super dangerous and toxic, and even there's examples of bicycles being extreme. When those were invented, those were highly dangerous, and we shouldn't have them. Video games, and I believe in one previous interview you've given, you even talked about how Socrates himself warned against the written word. So how do we where is the balance? How do we know if Dr. Susie Alegre is just cautioning against things just like we've always seen in history, or if this time we should take it seriously?
Well, firstly, one of the things to bear in mind when you're thinking about AI and what AI can do for you and your business and humanity is that AI isn't really a thing. It's tons of different things, tons of different technologies with tons of different use cases. And so there is no AI is bad or good. The really important thing when you're thinking about incorporating AI, both into your life or into your work, is, well, what actually is this? Will it actually benefit this scenario? Will it make my life better in this specific use case?
Mm-hmm.
Forget whether or not it's going to cure cancer. That is a whole other question. And again, if you're thinking about it as an option to cure cancer, it's probably not going to be a chatbot that's going to cure cancer. It's going to be something else. So really important to consider when you are talking and thinking about AI, actually be really specific and precise. What exactly is this? How exactly is it going to help? Why is it better? What are the risks? What are the downsides? And what are the real benefits? Not just the benefits that the salesperson is telling you about. And that's one of the things I found when my latest book came out. I saw some of the online comments where, it's not a balanced perspective because you haven't talked about all the benefits of AI. And I mean, my answer to that is I'm not selling AI, so I don't really need to. And there are plenty of people who will sell you AI and point to whatever benefits there are. And so I think whoever you're listening to, it's also very important to think, why are they saying what they're saying? What's their perspective? And what does it mean for me? So thinking really carefully about the specifics, because you see an awful lot of, snake oil salesmen, awful lot of claims. And again, this kind of pushback that AI is going to revolutionize the world. And therefore any criticism of AI is against progress. But as I say, AI is not one thing. It is a mass of different things. And knowing what it's good for and what it's not good for is what's really important.
Is there a future where, because your focus is human rights
Yeah.
to a large degree, is there a likely scenario, or is there a scenario at all where AI becomes a tool to enhance human rights? We think of, I think in the book you talk about some of the negatives. I like the criticism earlier. So why don't you talk about the positives? Perhaps is AI maybe a tool that helps everyone disrupt the bigger guys, that maybe pushes forward human rights.
Again, AI writ large is not going to save the world, but AI in specific circumstances may be really useful. So there are, for example, NGOs who are exploring the use of AI, for example, to identify patterns to reveal, for example, war crimes or crimes against humanity in order to be able to bring people to justice. So using technology as a way of documenting human rights abuses in order to support accountability. So there are, of course, positive use cases. It's never a blanket answer. It's always a really complicated, and I'm sorry for being too much of a lawyer and saying it depends. Nearly every question I get asked around these issues, I always have to say, it depends. It
Yeah,
depends on the detail.
right.
So there isn't it's all terrible or it's all fantastic. But what I think is really worrying is the level of hype that we are being sold to insert it into every aspect of our lives, almost unthinkingly. The fact that we are being told, if you don't take this on, then, you're going to be left behind. That's not necessarily true. You know, First mover advantage may well be a real disadvantage when the whole system fails And the people who are waiting to see how it went are able to do something else instead and learn from those mistakes. So it always depends. And taking the sales pitch unquestioningly is always going to be a huge risk in business.
So, I mean, that is interesting because, and I believe this. I'll be honest with you, I believe this. But we're often told AI, like executives, get on board with AI because your competition is, and if you don't, you will be left in the dust. Does it sound like you're pushing back on that idea?
Absolutely. And one of the examples I gave in the book was, the example of automated checkouts. And actually, I don't know if you like using an automated checkout at the supermarket. The idea is it's much faster, you need less staff, it's much better, it's automation, it's the future. But then last year, a kind of upscale supermarket in the UK in the north of England called Booth flipped that narrative. They started getting rid of their automated checkouts and bringing people back because they found that actually, people enjoy talking to people. It's part of the positive quality experience of going to a shop where you're going to be dealing with a real person instead of having to call a real person to come over and help you with the unidentified object in the bagging area, which is holding up your day extremely annoyingly. So I think there is starting to be that shift back. And I think it's important as well to think about experience and your customers' experience. And I've started hearing, radio shows where people are giving life hacks as to how to divert from the chatbot in order to get to speak to a human when you're trying to actually sort something out. And apparently there are ways, but that again, it's sort of human ingenuity to bypass the nightmare of having to navigate customer service through a chatbot that doesn't work. So again, it's really in the detail. It depends. It depends what you're trying to do. And again, from a kind of worker's perspective, what you find is in some cases, automation does not reduce the need for the number of workers. It just gives them more boring, soulless tasks to do. It reduces their enjoyment of their job. So again, going back to the supermarket example, actually my first Saturday job as a teenager was working in a supermarket as a checkout girl, as well as doing the pick and mix. And, I very much enjoyed chatting to people. It's the one thing that made the day bearable. But the idea that as somebody working in a supermarket, what your job is going to be is dealing with angry customers when the machine is failing. That
Mm-hmm.
actually puts you in a stressful line of fire without the positive interaction that you and customers might actually enjoy.
Yeah, I think, and you can push back on this, or we can move on. But I think there's an argument to be said with because AI is new and shiny. People may not be using it correctly, right? Like if you're using it to supplement humanity, you're probably not doing it right. But if you're using it to enhance humanity, enhance human connection, then you're using it right. If just real quickly, is that a fair choice?
Well, in principle, but I haven't seen any practice. I
Mm.
don't, I mean, I haven't seen a use case where it enhances connection myself. I mean, we've seen it in the dating sphere, the online dating sphere, where a couple of months ago, Bumble announced that it was going to give you an AI wingman in order to, chat up your prospective dates better than you could yourself. I mean, the real problem and the reason why people appear to be giving up on online dating is because it's soulless and impersonal and people are not finding the connection that it promised. Putting an AI interface so that your AI avatar is talking to someone else's AI avatar, to me, that is a signal that online dating is on its way out, not that AI is going to in some way improve human connection. I may be proved wrong, but that is my sense of it. And I haven't really seen that use case. I don't know if you remember as well, it's probably earlier this year that you were starting to see AI being sold as that sort of way where you can wear glasses and you can go and chat someone up in real life and the glasses will be telling you what to say to them. I mean, I don't know what it feels like to be on the other side of it, glasses, but it doesn't look great to me.
I would argue just the use cases in healthcare and law, for example. I know you're a
Yeah.
lawyer yourself, so maybe we can get into that a little bit later. But there is currently a backlog, at least in global healthcare, where it's hard to see a physician on time. So if we can, I mean, AI has a ways to go, as you know. It's hallucinating, it's making poor judgment calls. We all know this, but we all naturally assume that will change in the future. And so, what if AI? And again, we don't have the answers to this. Hopefully, we will one day. But what if AI increases access to good healthcare for everyone? And what if AI increases access to legal? AI can go through mountains of legal precedent to, in seconds in the future, right? That's what we're being told. And wouldn't that bring more legal representation to underserved communities? So those would be the use cases, at least I see. But what do executives do? Like executives are in this position where there's two choices, in my view, and maybe there's a third choice, or maybe these choices are false choices. So push back, please. But we have examples. Again, you bring this up. Pharma, oil, tobacco have captured governments in the past. And so in your mind, do we fear technocrats who are directly influencing all our business operations, or do we fear bureaucrats that could maybe regulate or use regulatory capture to control technology and do with it what they will?
That probably depends where you live. Again, I'm sorry for the "it depends" answer, but it really does. I mean, and that is why, one of the things that I talk about a lot in the book is that how this pans out depends on the protection of human rights. It depends on access to justice. It depends on accountability and governance in the places that we live. And that AI and technology does not, it's not above the law. So just because you're using technology does not mean the law does not apply. And so if you're living in a country where the rule of law still exists, where human rights are respected, then you're much more likely to be living in a society in the future where technology enhances our humanity and supports our ability to thrive than you are in a country where there is no rule of law, or where you cannot get access to justice, and where there is a huge amount of corruption. So they're not two separate things. And the question of whether you should fear technocrats or bureaucrats, it depends. And the really important thing for protecting us from the excesses, whether it is of technocrats or of bureaucrats, is that rule of law, respect of human rights, and democracy.
So it sounds like, well, again, it's probably more of a balance. I want to ask one more question, but briefly before I ask that, are there good examples of, let's just use the United States or the UK as examples, because there are probably too many cases to cite. Are there good examples where current law, I do believe you talk about the UDHR quite a bit, Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Are there current examples where current law or the UDHR are not sufficient in regulating or controlling or protecting us from maybe AI or technocratic overreach?
There will be very case specific areas where the law is not sufficient. So, for example, in the UK at the moment, there is a move and a campaign for law reform for criminal and civil offenses related to deepfake image based abuse. So, what's colloquially called deepfake pornography, but which essentially is image based abuse, not pornography. And there are gaps in the law for the way that this is dealt with, certainly in the UK, and I think in many countries around the world. And countries are starting to legislate and look at ways to legislate to be very clear that this is unacceptable through both criminal and civil law. So there will be these kind of specific areas where there will be a need for additional laws. Where something like human rights law becomes useful is in looking at both government obligations to legislate to protect us from tech corporations or from each other and our use of technology, like with the image-based abuse issue. And also to protect us from the ways governments might use technology
Right.
to threaten our human rights. And so in the UK, we have the Human Rights Act, which is derived from the European Convention on Human Rights, which itself is derived from the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The reason I talk a lot about the UDHR is because it's universal. And so it has relevance everywhere. But in, hard law in the UK, the Human Rights Act says that all public authorities have to act in a way that respects our human rights as listed in the Human Rights Act. So that is a very clear legal tool that you can then use to hold public authorities to account for ways they might use tech, which could infringe specific human rights, not only privacy, but other human rights as well.
Last question before I let you go here. I like that in the book you talk about something that's really, really interesting. You talk about the use of GPS, and you've talked about this in interviews too, and how technology can kind of, for lack of a better term, deactivate certain areas of our brain. And so obviously this is a concern for executives on if they become over reliant on technology, over reliant on chatbots and large language models. Do employees start to use their brains less? How do leaders make sure that their employees don't deactivate those highly critical parts of the brain necessary for critical thinking?
It's a really interesting question. And as you say, there's been increasing research that shows that heavy use of GPS actually reduces your natural sense of direction. So even if you started off with a great sense of direction, if you heavily use GPS, it's likely that your brain will literally change its form in ways that means that you can't orientate yourself without GPS going forward. And there's been some very recent research that seems to show similar effects of generative AI on students, although obviously it's very, very new. And so it remains to be seen how it will develop over time. But I've certainly seen an initial study that seemed to show that using generative AI boosted students' ability in tests, but that when the generative AI was then taken away, their ability dropped below the baseline. So that reliance was actually reducing their innate ability. That also goes again to a kind of question of studying and capacity building that we all have. And it's a really interesting question that I was asked in one conference was, what about the problem of students relying on generative AI or potentially getting qualifications using generative AI without actually doing the work or understanding what their topic is? And so people landing up with professional qualifications who actually do not have the professional knowledge or ability to do the job. And that, I think, is going to be the next level of challenges that we're going to be facing. So it really is a big question, this issue of de-skilling.
Yeah, no, it's a big question, and unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. Maybe we can have you back in the future. Dr. Susie Alegre, author of what's out today, Human Rights and Robot Wrongs. Can you give us the website so people can reach out and find you?
At www.susiealegre.com.
Susie, thank you so much for coming on Tomorrowist.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Before we say goodbye, I encourage you to subscribe to Tomorrowist wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all our episodes at shrm.org/Tomorrowist, and while you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter. Thanks for listening, and remember, the workplace is changing rapidly. You don't have time to be a futurist. Be a Tomorrowist.